Athlete mental training involves you training your mind as an athlete in a similar way to how you train your physical skills, where you see your mind as a combination of mental skills that will work together to help you perform your best during games. What I'm going to do is break down athlete mental training as a whole, and I'm going to do so in in a similar way to the way I approach my one-on-one coaching when I'm working with athletes. And that's where we look at the main mental game challenges athletes face, the main mental skills you want to work on developing, and then the mental training tools that you can use to develop those skills. So the main mental game challenges that athletes face involve the mental blocks that you might be experiencing. In other words, just the things that are getting in your way from performing your best on the field or court. I want to break down each one of these, speak briefly about them, and then we'll move on to the mental skills. So the first mental game challenge is the fear of failure. The fear of failure involves you being afraid of making mistakes. You might be afraid of making mistakes because you don't want to lose your starting position, or maybe you are afraid of having your stats drop. Maybe you're in high school and you're afraid of messing up in a tournament because you know that there are college coaches watching. The fear of mistakes or the fear of failure, it's a tough one to deal with because when you're out there playing to avoid mistakes, you inevitably make more mistakes because you're playing timid and you work to avoid the thing that you're afraid of. Now, with the fear of failure, we also see it accompanied by the next mental game challenge I want to discuss, which is sports performance anxiety. Sports performance anxiety involves intense worries about what may or may not happen. Now, I say that this goes along with fear because when you're afraid of making a mistake, you will naturally worry about whether or not the mistake will happen. This worry or anxiety causes that tightness when you play. It causes you to feel like you're tense out there, you are playing robotic, you're just not in the flow of the game because you're experiencing so much of this worry. Now, when you do experience sports anxiety, your thoughts are in the future. You're worried about what might happen. You're thinking about what everybody else will think of your game. You're not present. And the less present you are when you play, the worse you will perform. The next mental game challenge is perfectionism. Perfectionism involves you really feeling like you have to play perfect, right? You have to play to the absolute best of your abilities. Now, that might sound like a great mentality to have on the surface, and there are admittedly some positive qualities of perfectionism, mainly when it comes to the motivation you have to train. But when we look at performances, when you go into a game or a match, just a competition in general, and you're expecting yourself to be perfect, number one, this will lead to anxiety because when you expect yourself to be perfect, it's natural to then worry about not being perfect. So we see more tightness and tension when you play. And then if you do make one mistake, it will make it more difficult to move on. So this feeds into another mental game challenge, which is the loss of composure, which means you have a difficult time managing your anger, managing your frustration, and your emotions in general. And when you can't move on from a mistake because you lose your composure, and by the way, losing composure doesn't have to mean that you're throwing things or you're yelling out loud. It can also be mentally or internally you're losing composure, where you're beating yourself up, you're thinking negatively, you're just downright being mean to yourself after a mistake. And when that happens, it puts you in a worse position to make the next play, and this is why we see a lot of times mistakes snowball into more mistakes and then snowball into a bad game and then a bad week and then a slump. And then long term, it's also going to lower your confidence because you're beating yourself up after every single mistake. Now, another mental game challenge is negative self-talk. And this kind of goes along with what I was just saying about loss of composure. Your thinking as an athlete is critical to your confidence. It's critical to your focus. And overall, it's critical to your performance. And when you have negative self-talk, which means you beat yourself up after mistakes, you think about how you can't play well going into the game. During the game, you think things like, I don't want the ball hit to me, or I hope I don't have to make this, or I hope the ball doesn't get passed to me, right? You just having that negative thinking about yourself in your game. This will lower your confidence in the moment, and then we'll also see it long-term have an impact on your self-belief. Another mental game challenge that you might experience is social approval. Social approval involves you looking to other people to validate how good you are as a player. This one leads to a lot of fear. It leads to a lot of anxiety, right? It leads to a lot of negative self-talk. And the thing about most of these is they all play into one another, right? But social approval, for example, would be me worrying so much about what my coach thinks of me while I play. Now, if I'm so worried about what my coach thinks of me when I play, I won't be focused on myself, I won't be relaxed in the moment, and I will underperform. And then the last mental game challenge I want to mention is poor focus. When you have a difficult time focusing in practice, but then especially when you're in a game and you have a difficult time focusing in the moment on what you're doing, whether you're thinking about the fans in the stands, right, their distraction, or the opponent, or even if you're thinking so much about a last mistake that you made or worrying about what will happen in the future, that will pull your attention away from the present moment and result in underperforming. Now, whenever you experience any of these mental game challenges, naturally our goal is to work through these challenges, and that's what I work on within my one-on-one coaching program, which, by the way, if you are interested in learning more about my one-on-one coaching, I've put a link to it in the description below. Now, the way that we work through these mental game challenges, yes, involves talking through the fears, talking through the worries, but most importantly, it involves building mental skills. So that brings me to the next section of this entire athlete mental training approach. And so there are a few mental skills that I want to discuss with you today. One is self-awareness, and I think self-awareness is at the core of a strong mental game and just at the core of a strong mindset in general, right? Whether we're an athlete or not, because self-awareness means, specifically in relation to sports, which is what we're talking about, it means you being able to recognize what you're thinking, how you're feeling, how you're playing, how what you're thinking is impacting your emotional state, how your emotional state and your thoughts are impacting your actions, and then how your performance is then impacting your thoughts and your feelings. Now, the whole idea of self-awareness is, and why I like to use self-awareness within my coaching, is built on this idea of the thought, feeling, action cycle, which means that our thinking is impacting our feelings and emotions. Our feelings and emotions are then feeding back into the types of thoughts we have. For example, if I'm thinking I suck and I feel worse about myself, the worse I feel about myself, the more likely it is that I think those negative thoughts. And then my thoughts and my feelings will then impact my behavior or my actions on the field or on the court, right? So if I'm thinking I suck, I'm feeling bad about myself, I'm thinking worse things about myself, then when I go out there and play, my behavior will probably mimic how I'm feeling and how I'm thinking, which will be timid play, less confident play, less aggressive play. So overall, I won't be performing as well. And the reason this is critical is because when you understand how your thinking is impacting your play and your emotions, and then you can recognize in the moment that you're thinking that way, then we can work on changing it. And it's in changing it where we start to see a change in your behavior and your performance. The second mental skill, which really helps us work on developing a higher level of performance, is self-confidence. As an athlete, you know you need to be confident. I'm sure you've had coaches, parents, teammates, just anybody in general talk to you about developing confidence. And within my work, I like to break confidence down into two different forms, which is confidence and understanding and confidence and execution. Confidence and understanding involves understanding that you have skills. That's probably the easiest form to develop, because if you see yourself perform well in practice or training, you understand that you have skills that are good enough to go out there and play well. Confidence and execution, on the other hand, involves you having enough confidence in your execution that you can trust in yourself and let go to go out there and play well. And when I look at confidence and the way I've seen confidence help athletes within their game, mainly has to do with that idea of being able to let go and play freely. Whenever you try to force a good performance because you're afraid or you're anxious, you'll likely underperform, because trying to force a good performance is the opposite of just trusting yourself and allowing yourself to flow and be in the rhythm of the game. And so we need confidence and we need trust in ourselves to be able to let go of this need to force, let go of the need to control, and just allow ourselves to perform. The next mental skill that I want to talk about is managing mistakes. Now, losing composure was a mental game challenge that I discussed, and so managing mistakes is the clear skill that will help us manage that loss of composure. Now, as an athlete, you're going to make mistakes. They're inevitable. So the skill that we want to develop is not the skill of being perfect, but the skill of managing mistakes and moving on from mistakes. And the way that we can work on moving on from mistakes is controlling our mental reactions, so specifically controlling our thinking, which again is why self-awareness is critical, because you must understand how you're thinking in the moment when you're upset and when you're losing composure to be able to change that. And we can also use tools like your breathing and performance objectives, which I'll talk about more here in a second, to help us move on. The next mental skill is focus. You have to know how to focus during practice, during games, and then over the long term, we want to develop the skill of focus. So if I'm looking at focus for athletes, We're going to break this up into a long-term skill we want to develop, and then a skill that we want to develop on a shorter-term scale. Now, the short-term scale is going into this practice or going into this competition. How do you keep yourself focused in the moment on what you need to be doing? If it's practice, how do you focus with intent and perform your drill or perform the practice with full attention on what you're doing? That's going to help us increase the rate of improvement for you. When it comes to a game, we need to figure out how do you keep yourself focused in the moment so your attention isn't drifting into the past, or you're starting to think about the future, or you start to think about the fans or anything. How do you keep yourself fully focused on what you're doing? And when you're able to do that during a game, you will see your performance improve. The next mental skill is calming your nerves. Whenever I'm working with a player on sports performance anxiety, we recognize that anxiety impacts us in the moment, but it also impacts us a lot going into games. So we need to work on calming our nerves both before the game and then also during the game, especially if it's a big moment during the game. So the skill of being able to calm your nerves, again, stems from self-awareness, because we need to understand that we are feeling anxious in the moment, that we're feeling nervous, and then also why. So where's our attention right now? Are we thinking too much about the future? Are we thinking too much about what other people might say? Or are we fully focused in the moment? And most importantly, how do we get ourselves to be fully focused in the moment? So that's what the skill of calming your nerves will help you do. And then the last skill I want to mention is goal setting. Now, goal setting is such a cool mental skill because a lot of the mental game challenges I mentioned earlier, they stem from improper goals. Now, what I mean by that is that if I'm going into a game and I say I want to make no mistakes, that's my goal today, I'm likely going to see fear, anxiety, and perfectionism develop. But if I go into a game and say, my goal today is to give full effort, well, I have reduced the chances of playing with fear, and I've increased the chances of playing aggressively. So going into games, so on a smaller scale, we want to know how to set proper goals to unleash that full potential. But then long term, we need to understand how to set outcome goals over the long term to increase motivation, and then also setting goals for ourselves during games. So those are the main mental skills that you want to be able to work on. Now, how do we develop these mental skills? Well, that's where we break it down now into mental training tools. So we have the mental game challenges that we know need to be overcome and worked through by developing mental skills. And then we use conversation, right? So coaching, talking back and forth, along with the implementation of mental training tools to develop these mental skills. And so there are quite a few mental training tools that I use within my coaching that you can use as an athlete, but I want to share just a few of them right here. So the first one is mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness meditation, I honestly think should be at the top of the list of any mental training tool that you want to use as an athlete, because it helps us develop so many of the skills. It will work on developing self-awareness because you're spending more time with your thoughts. It will help us develop better control over our thinking, the ability to manage mistakes and improve composure, because if you learn how to fully focus in the moment through meditation, it's easier to recenter yourself in the moment. It's easier to use your breathing to calm yourself down. It helps with focus because mindfulness meditation, as I say to a lot of players, is really focus training because you're training yourself to be present in the moment. So that's a very important tool for you to begin using. Another one is visualization, and visualization is a tool that we can use in a lot of different respects. Mainly it's going to be used for building confidence, where you're visualizing yourself performing well, visualizing your skills going the way you want them to. But I've also been using a lot of negative visualization, which involves you visualizing things not going the way you want in an attempt to develop that ability to be resilient, to manage mistakes, to bounce back, to deal with distracting opponents, to deal with crowd pressure, being able to deal with all that through the use of visualization. Another mental training tool is a self-talk routine. So there are two approaches that I take to working on self-talk or to work on your thinking. One is using a self-talk routine, which involves creating a list of positive statements and then repeating it over and over and over again, working to train your internal dialogue. And then the next way is through the use of the next tool, which is reframing your thoughts. And this is more of the in-the-moment tool that we want to use, where going back to self-awareness, if we are aware that we are thinking a certain way that is unhelpful, we would want to reframe and change our thinking in that moment. The next tool is a thought-stopping phrase, which is a phrase that you can use in the moment to try to get yourself to move on from a mistake, to get yourself to stop focusing on other people. So it's a statement that we memorize and then use in the moment. An example of that would be let it go, reset, refocus. Something very simple like that. But the whole idea there is we're trying to kick into gear this rational thinking or this logical thinking when we are in a moment where our emotions are starting to take over. The next tool is setting performance objectives. Now, a performance objective is a controllable target that you set for yourself, either for a practice or for a game. Now, for practices, these involve setting a performance objective that gets you focused on what you want to work on that day, whereas for a game, it's more about what do you want to focus on that's part of the process that will allow you to perform your best. This helps us with developing focus. It's also a great way of learning how to set the proper goals, both for practices and games. And the next mental training tool is count breathing. Count breathing is very similar to mindfulness meditation, where we are using our attention and our breathing to help us center ourselves in the present moment and to help calm down. It's a great tool if you're dealing with nerves or anxiety. It's also a great tool to use when you're wanting to move on from a mistake and manage your composure. All count breathing is where you decide on a certain number that you'll inhale for and then a certain number you'll exhale for. Typically, I start athletes off by breathing in for 4, breathing out for 4, but you can also breathe in for 5, exhale for 10, where you're exhaling nice and slowly. The whole idea here is we're wanting to take nice and deep breaths over and over again, so it's not just one deep breath, but then you're focusing on the numbers to help center your attention in the present moment. The next mental training tool is identifying and reviewing your strengths. This is a great tool if you're wanting to build confidence. List out your strengths, review them before games, review them on a daily basis. Again, it's a great way to build confidence. Another mental training tool is remembering past successes, which goes along the same lines, where we're using that to build confidence. And this is one that I really like to use a lot when players are dealing with self-doubt before a game. And so, right before the game, they'll just think about all the times they've had success recently, because it's so easy to have your confidence based on your most recent performance. There was a player I'm working with right now, and last week she mentioned to me, well, I'm only as good as my last performance. I heard that many times when I was playing baseball. And I think that is true to an extent, but we also have to recognize that we can choose our own point of reference, which means we get to choose where we look to in the past to validate how good we should feel about our ability to perform in the present. And so if I've had a couple bad games recently, naturally I'll probably feel less confident, but I know that in order to turn things around, I need to feel confident. So I'm going to choose to go back to the successes I've had in the past, remind myself of those before the game as a way to build confidence and trust going into that performance. And then the last mental training tool is a pre-game routine. And this involves you compiling them together and then using them as part of a routine for you as you approach the game to help yourself get mentally focused, mentally relaxed, confident, just overall get into the right mindset for yourself. Now, that was a pretty quick overview of all of these different mental game challenges, the mental skills, and the mental training tools. And if you would like a more in-depth look at all of them, I do have a new book published on Amazon titled Athlete Mental Training. And what it does is it goes through each one of these sections. The first section is all about mental game challenges. It covers every single one of them, goes into detail on each challenge, and talks about how to work through the challenge. The next section is about building these mental skills, where you're going to look at and start to learn what the mental skill is, how it improves your performance, and then most importantly, how do you develop it. And then the last part of the book involves the mental training tools and goes into a lot more detail on each mental training tool. And then it also has an exercise for you to complete if the exercise is needed in order to work on developing that mental training tool. So if you are interested in getting yourself a copy of the Athlete Mental Training book, I've put a link to it in the description below. As I mentioned earlier, I also offer one-on-one coaching along with 2 mental training courses. One is called the Confident Competitor Academy, and the other is the Mentally Tough Kid. The Confident Competitor Academy is great for athletes of all ages, whereas the Mentally Tough Kid is specific for youth athletes. If you have any questions about any of the mental game challenges, the mental skills, or the mental training tools I mentioned today, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and I wish you the best of success in all that you do.